Well, welcome back. Thank you all so much for being thoughtful and being with us with the timing. We're gonna, now that we have created space for everyone who wants to join us, we're gonna pass the mic over to Mari, who's gonna talk about how all of the context that you heard, if you were here, and the context that you can watch later if you weren't, because we're recording this, so you've missed nothing, connects to the the US-Canada strategy for B-Lab. So Mari, I'll pass it to you.
Hi, everyone. And I promise there's a reason why my name says Hellshire Beach. You'll hear a little bit more of it, and I'm just going to tell a story really quickly if everyone would go on the journey with me. I had the privilege of living in the countryside of Jamaica for a summer, and I was participating in a service leadership program that had us study at the University of the West Indies and volunteer in the local community. My volunteer site was an elementary school working with incredible students and staff. And in Jamaica, I met some of the kindest, most incredible people I've ever met. I'd walk down the street and hear Wagwan, and each time the person would respond, me giving thanks for life. Eventually, when I was asked Wagwan, I'd respond in the same way, carrying that same gratitude for being alive. The gratitude, kindness, and overall light of the people I met was something that could always be felt. And while I was there, Jamaica felt like home. However, these same incredible people are being adversely impacted by the global climate crisis. There was a place in Jamaica named Hellshire Beach in Portmore, St. Catherine. And the beach was a hot spot for visitors and Jamaicans alike. The cheerful laughter of children could be heard on the beach, and the smiles of people could be seen from far away. And well-crafted wooden chairs that you can see in the picture of my background would sit in the front of local restaurants and businesses. But over the past decade, that beach has disappeared. Land is disappearing on small Caribbean islands due to rising sea levels. And while island nations like Jamaica contribute a tiny fraction of the greenhouse gas emissions that are heating the planet, they suffer the worst consequences of the climate crisis. Jamaica and many other Caribbean countries were places where enslaved African people were dropped off during the transatlantic slave trade. And the transatlantic slave trade created what we know now as shareholder capitalism. And the system that exists today. And this was an example where human beings were a product and free labor for shareholders. Jamaicans fought for their independence from Britain and were punished for that achievement with poverty. Britain pulled out their finances from the independent country, forcing them to take out loans with the IMF Bank that placed tariffs on their natural goods and resources. That's leaving an open door for foreign companies to use their land to export and use their people for cheap labor while funneling the money offshore. This country of beautiful people has already been fighting the greedy and extractive and often inhumane nature of shareholder capitalism. But now climate change is striking hard too. Capitalism created the climate crisis and racial equity crisis that we're facing right now. And this is why racial equity and climate justice must be sisters and work together. And because we're aware of these truths, B-Lab has committed itself to being an anti-racist organization and focusing on 3 pillars to mobilize our community power towards achieving climate justice, racial equity, and a stakeholder economy that centers people and the planet. And by focusing on anti-racist education for our staff and B Corp community, centering the Black, Indigenous, and people of color community in events, safe spaces, company partnerships, and hiring a racial equity director, a manager to lead the way, and me, the community engagement manager, we're set to move on bold ambitions of racial equity by 2022. And although racial equity and climate sit as separate initiatives, We must remember the intersection of climate justice and race as we do this work. The most high stakes effects of climate change are often felt by brown faces first, like those folks in Jamaica. And this isn't by mistake, but by the design of racial inequity. However, I know that this is a community that will help solve racial inequity and the climate crisis, because if not us, then who?
Thank you so much. I think that is the perfect transition into what we're going to do next. So I want to just set a little context for our new arrivals. We're in an arc of work together. And so what we're going to do next is have a conversation about climate justice, led by Dr. Londa Williams. Oh, there we go. Dr. Londa Williams of B-Lab and Dan Eagle of Inclusion Next Work. They're going to introduce the people with whom they'll be speaking, but I want to just situate this in the arc. This conversation is going to lead into a chance for you all to talk to each other about what questions arise. What are you wondering about? What do you want to ask these brilliant leaders? And then we'll come back and actually give Dan and Alonda a chance to give voice to your questions. So that's what our next section is going to orient around, the next hour that we have together. And then we'll come back and start thinking about, given the context that we've just talked about around centering justice, what does that mean for our commitments? What commitments will we make? So that's what's coming after. All right, so with that, I want to invite Dr. Londa Williams and Dan Eagle to join me here in the spotlight. And then you all can introduce the amazing humans that you have done such great work inviting in, welcoming, orienting to be part of this conversation. And I'll fade into the background.
Fade into the background. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, Mari. That was literally the perfect segue into this conversation. Super excited to be learning more. And please, if you do not know who Mari is, if you're not following her, she's creating some great spaces for our BIPOC community amongst the B Corp network. So excited to be working alongside her and following along her with her work. Today we are here to continue the conversation. We've gotten the arc, and now we're going to join. We're going to invite some folks to join us on stage. I have my friend and colleague Dan Eagle joining me. He's been helping. He'll be fielding some of these questions, as well as helping us with the conversation as we go along. I want to briefly introduce. I encourage you to go back, look into Shed, find these folks' websites, and follow them on their LinkedIn. Learn more about them. But we're going to dive into the conversation for the sake of time. I would like to present and introduce to a lot of you several folks. I have on the line with us Elgin Avila, who is founder of Equitable Health Solutions. He is joining us from Canada. We also, no, Elgin is not in Canada. Marc Lee is in Canada. I apologize. Marc Lee is the director of the Climate Justice Project in the Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives. And we're also going to be joined by Kelly Wyche, founder of Collective Power. Kelly, thank you very much for joining us as well. She'll be popping up on screen here just shortly. We're really excited to be diving into the conversation. And first, we would like to allow a little bit of space for us to hear from you. We want to give you about 1 or 2 minutes. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing, and then we'll be diving into some interesting conversations. I will pass it to Elgin first.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at. So I guess just to introduce myself, as she said, my name is Elgin Avila, born and raised from Detroit, Michigan. It's a pleasure to be here. It makes me emotional seeing all these Black and brown faces and folks who are just so supportive of the work that we're doing here. So honestly, I'm quite honored to be here with some of my colleagues and friends. So I just want to take that opportunity now and say thank you. I do a lot of work with environmental justice, and I have a training in industrial hygiene. So really, I try to use my skill set and transfer it over to underserved communities. With that, I also try to influence companies that I work with, whether that be as a consultant or in my traditional job. But ultimately, we try and influence and push organizations to perform more anti-racist work. So happy to be here. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it on. You want me to pick, or you pick somebody?
You can pick. Go ahead and pick.
I'll pass it to my colleague, Kelly. Good to see you.
Thank you, Elgin. Great to see you. Thank you, Dr. Londa and Dan as well, Danny. My name is Kelly Wyche. I use she, her pronouns. I am calling in from the unceded land of the Catawba people right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Actually, Catawba County, which I'm very proud of. And I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. I am a designer and a business strategist. I've worked across a lot of different industries doing innovation and product development work, human-centered design and design thinking, and spent a lot of years in the utility world. So working in renewable energy infrastructure and development. I recently graduated with an MBA from Yale University. Shout out to my colleague, Danny, on the line as well, my classmate and colleague. And I founded an organization called Collective Power, and we do climate justice and equity work primarily through working directly with communities, groups of people engaged in collective action. We worked with a lot of intentional communities who are really looking to build their own infrastructure. And so we bring a climate justice and equity perspective to trying to do that work, which, you know, we run up against a lot of obstacles in the current infrastructure development world, tried to build something and really maintain ownership within the community. And so I take a lot of those insights through working with communities and thinking about how to build and live with each other and really supportive, equitable frameworks, and also with the land. And I share those insights through consulting work with different organizations that are looking to bring climate justice and equity into their work or culture. So that is how I come to this wonderful conversation and how I've met Elgin, Alonda, and Dan all through that work. And I'm really excited to talk with everyone today. And I will pass it over to Marc.
Thanks, Kelly. And thanks so much to Alonda for reaching out to me to be part of this conversation. I'm really thrilled to be here. Such a great, inspiring group of people in the room, even just from the very small conversations I've had so far. And I was really just flipping through that climate justice playbook that you guys have developed. I really look forward to reading that as well. So I feel like I'm learning as much, and I hope you can, share some of our experiences here. So to be honest, I'm feeling a little bit emotional right now. Like we just in where I come from, Vancouver, British Columbia, which is traditional Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, we just came through this insane heat wave. Like they called it a heat dome, and you probably saw it in other parts of the Pacific Northwest as well. But like we destroyed the previous temperature records. Like about 2 hours away from I live, we just blew 3 days in a row the all-time Canadian land temperature record. And in Vancouver, like it's pretty mild in the summer, and sorry, I'm speaking in Celsius, so hopefully it's not too alienating, but normally it would never get higher than 30 degrees, and we pushed near 40, so maybe like close to 120 like in Fahrenheit. And people here don't have air conditioning. So, when over the weekend, just at home, we were like literally in survival mode. How are you going to make it through the day and the weekend with fans and opening and closing windows and just dealing with it? And then Monday I went back to my office for the first time in ages, post COVID, and I was in an air conditioned office, and it was so comfortable, and I could just go through my day, and then going outside was a little temporary adventure, and it just made me really feel that the access to cooling is a class issue, and it's really powerful stuff. And the folks who were most hard done by, we've had over 100 people die in the past few days from the heat, and a lot of people in the poorest parts of town are so exposed, and these are the people who've done the least to cause the problem that we're in. And that to me is like the heart of climate justice right there. Who's benefited from our use of fossil fuels, and who's paying the price? So for me, my work, I'm an economist by trade. I work for a national research institute called the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And when my home province, British Columbia, started getting serious about climate change, it's a very right-wing government in power. And we were concerned that in the pursuit of environmental or climate goals, they would just run roughshod over low-income households or renters or workers in particular areas. So our work has been really trying to integrate, insert the DNA of social justice into climate policy so that we better understand how climate change itself is affecting different populations and how climate policy can affect different populations and can either shrink or worsen inequalities. So we've been doing a whole bunch of research in that area. Maybe we can get into some of the details on it, but just by way of introduction, that's where I'm coming from. And like I said, just thrilled to be part of the conversation here today.
Oh, thank you, Marc. That's like I got lucky with another really good segue. Very much so, right? Never enough time, right? I'm telling you right now, there probably won't be enough time to go into all of the details about all the things that we do, unfortunately. But I would like to say, please, 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 this is access. Look at these individuals as resources, right? They are here to resource this conversation. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat. But we're going to start with one, and I'm going to ask that, Marc, you don't answer this one first because you kind of touched base on it. But the first question I want to dive into is, what would you say climate justice is, right? From your perspective, what is climate justice? But more importantly, why is it bigger and deeper than climate change? Why are these conversations should be kind of merged together? And Marc, you gave us a really good thing to think about in terms of access, right? And just something as simple as air conditioning. Elgin, Kelly, I see you're off mute.
Yes, I can take that one to start. I think, first and foremost, climate justice or environmental justice, I use them interchangeably, really starts with acknowledging that there has been an unequal burden on particular groups in society, both as Marc did in his story and also Mari in hers as well. That acknowledgement piece, that there has been a history of an unequal burden on certain groups in society and that there currently is one that we're seeing, is really important to even calling whatever you're talking about justice oriented. So I think it really starts there, and acknowledging that the unequal burden that certain people bear is both the result of climate change and some of the things that cause climate change. And in acknowledging that, trying to have a conversation about what climate justice is, and particularly how it's a lot deeper and more inclusive than just climate change or environmentalism work. I think it's really about who's at the table making a lot of these decisions and changes moving forward, who is a part of the work that's being done, and is it a justice oriented setup if the people who have been bearing unequally the burdens of these systems are not a part or not at the table in the conversation of figuring out, well, how do we do this better moving forward? And I think a lot of the work that I find right now in climate justice spaces is, because I am, I've gone to a good school and I'm in these corporate spaces and I'm at the table of having these conversations, is the constant reminder of, okay, who's not at the table having this conversation that's also impacted by what's happening. So I find a lot of climate justice work to be about acknowledging the history and the reality that is unjust, and trying to do climate change work in a way that takes into account equitable practices, has the right people at the table to bring that perspective, and just builds that into every aspect of the work that's being done. So to me, climate justice encompasses maybe not climate change, but the work of trying to stop climate change or protect the environment. That is inherently a part of climate justice.
Thank you for sharing. Elgin, anything you'd add?
That's tough to add after that, I'm gonna be honest with you. But I think one of the important things, again, that possibly I could just, hone in a little bit more on, I guess, again, this taken away from what was already said, I think is just the impact of like these specific communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change. And, not just acknowledging that and saying, hey, there's this disproportionate burden, but also thinking about the communities themselves and the culture that was associated with it. You can't just transplant that community and drop it off somewhere. So if you have these communities that are, losing their beaches, losing their way of life, is not a just approach to just say, hey, well, you guys can just move inland, or you folks could just move inland. You also need to really dig a little deeper and understand what the community wants, what the community needs, and what they're going to request in order to make it a just process, in order to one, alleviate the situation, but also to, respect the culture and the identity of those communities. So that way you have a much more just approach moving forward in your interventions and programs.
Mm-hmm. What I hear there a little bit, Elgin, is like, whose comfort are you centering, right? Sometimes our solutions are, these folks can just do this thing and that will solve their problem. But everyone is not able to just do that thing. And then we have to understand, who are we centering that comfortability on? Why is it okay for one group who has the access to make something that might be uncomfortable a little more comfortable because of the access that they have, whereas some level of comfort for others are devastatingly uncomfortable? So really trying to think into that. Marc, we're going to get back to you. Let's move to another question, because I think that you might have something that you can add on to one of these next ones. When we think about actions at businesses, right, we've got a lot of businesses on the line and they're listening. When we think about actions that businesses can take, what are some actions that they can take that would have the greatest impact on your community? So when you think about the communities that you believe in and that you represent, what are some actions that businesses can take that you think would have the biggest impact as it relates to climate change and climate justice? If you have one, yeah, Marc, sure.
Sure. Well, I think, Kelly's point of who's in the room is really important, and who's making the decisions, and like, who are we trying to save this planet for anyways? I think there's an element here that recognizing that, inequality is the second inconvenient truth, and we have just such vast inequalities in different resources and different capacities, and it can't just all be about kind of middle-class people having more green consumption options. It's not about the world we want isn't just about swapping out carbon emitting technologies for ones that are zero carbon. So it's not just about electric vehicles and clean buildings. It's more, I think, profound. Like, what the world we want to move to isn't one where our billionaires are flying around in hydrogen powered jets and we have solar powered sweatshops, right? That's not the world that I want to live in. I think the opportunity with all of this is that looking for structural change, and we're like, what are the win-wins that we can achieve? That reduce our emissions profile, but also build a more inclusive and profoundly, radically democratic society. So I think, extrapolating those ideas to business, it's about the relationships that you have. Like, what's your place in the world? How does that relate in terms of your workers, and what are the policies that are prevailing there? What are the relationships in your supply chain that can be changed and improved and leveraged up for change? What does that relate in terms of your board and your customers? All of those different relationships are important points of contact where change can happen. And I think it's really central for business to be at the table doing this in their practices, but also I think as political advocates, as someone works in policy, governments listen to business, and too often they're listening to the wrong businesses, the fossil fuel companies. We need a strong business constituency that can speak to government from a business perspective that says, this is what we need, and we're serious about it. So I think in all of those dimensions, there's a profound potential for change from groups like yourselves.
Thank you, Marc. Kelly, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that was so great, Marc. Just such an economist, and I appreciated all those perspectives. I think kind of maybe summarizing some of the different points you made, I would offer businesses really looking, if they haven't already, at the just transition model, which is something that I've heard a lot more commonly lately in the business world. To my knowledge, it comes from an organization called the Movement Generation. Actually, I have an image right here. This is what it looks like. If y'all haven't seen it, I still use printers. But I think understanding that this is being talked about more, which surprised me, to be honest, because when I really look at this model and what it's saying, it's inherently anti-capitalist, right? It talks about an extractive system being unsustainable and trying to move towards a more regenerative economy. You know, the way it lays out the current system is being rooted in consumerism and colonialism and a colonial mindset. And so we're moving away from that into caring and sacredness of this new framework. That's a very strong transition. So I think it's a really great place to start to really look at kind of where your business might fit into this current model, and form some ideas around how in your normal business day-to-day work, you can start to try to reduce some of the harm that's being done, change your approach, not just as a way to be, you know, climate positive, but as a way to be strategic for the future and the way things are moving. Like, think a new way of thinking that like this extractive way of being is not going to last much longer. So how can we as a business be set up to more strategically work in this like regenerative framework? And looking at your supply chains and things that are really rooted in these older systems is a really great place to start to identify what you can truly do that I think will make the biggest impact. And I think the other thing that's an easier, maybe an easier place to start with internally within your own corporate culture is this idea of trying to shift towards more democracy in the workplace, co-op modelship, co-op models, or even just more democratized decision-making within your company, I think can also be a step towards that, where some of the people who aren't in the rooms, but even work at the company, they got their foot in the door to the company, but they're still not affecting change, getting those people into the rooms and really benefiting from the knowledge that you have within your organization.
Thank you so much. What I also hear is if you haven't heard of the terminology speed of trust, sometimes your efforts at your organization either are futile, you're not moving the needle, or you're not seeing any success because you don't have the trust that's needed to get the job done. That means that you have to take a step back, right? And actually go back into the communities and go back into these spaces and build relationship, as Marc mentioned, and build that trust to be able to see a little bit more work movement on the work that you're doing. So it doesn't mean stop doing the work. It means do the work a different way. And I think that sometimes we get challenged with that. I'm going to ask a question from the audience, and then I'm going to start with Elgin. And then I think we're going to break into a little bit of a break to allow them to come together and come up with some more questions to have us ask. I'm going to ask one that actually came up on the panel yesterday. It's about politics and the intersectionality. Look at that. So the question is, in the United States, climate is politicized. How politicized, I said that right. Okay, how do we get past this to make improvements? To make matters worse, EDI is also politicized. It is now, thank you very much. So climate justice is even harder to tackle. It is very depressing. I need a little hope. What can we say about that? Elgin, I'm gonna start with you.
That's tough. Do you mind just repeating just that first part? I just want to make sure I get it right.
In the United States, climate is politicized. How do we get past this to make improvements? EDI is also politicized. So, yes.
Got you. So I'm gonna try and keep it brief because I know we got some great folks on here who can also ask and feed into this. So I think one of the most important things to remember is there's a lot of businesses on here, for example, correct? So you have the power, you have the influence to really, impact which direction politics goes. A lot of you have lobbying power. A lot of you have influence on the folks who are on the Hill. A lot of folks here have a lot of power with also impacting the communities you serve. And the communities that you are actually in which your supply chain is in, for example. You have that level of influence. So if you take the climate justice based approaches, or just in general, the just based approaches, you can really impact the politics and actually, turn the tide if that's a direction that you would like to go in. from an individual perspective, I think all of us have that power to really drive and influence policy, whether that be you get a policy-based job, whether you respond to proposed legislation, whether you get your friends, family on board, et cetera. You have the power to influence those votes. You have the power to really influence a lot of our societal impacts. Again, it's not an easy solution by any means, but there absolutely is power in your individual voice and in your organization's voice. In relations to equity, diversity, and inclusion, I think my colleagues are going to do a great job in that regard. But I think if you're in a management level position, I think you have an opportunity to really influence your organization. Whether it's at your department level, division level, whatever you decide to call it, team level, whatever it is, you have the power to influence those folks. If you only have 8 people in there and you're in an organization of 1,000, then influence your circle. You are actually one of, I think, you know, a lot of people hear this all the time, but you are the company you keep. And if you influence the company that you keep, especially at work, you are able to transition and actually impact a lot of the work that you are involved in. So I highly suggest and I highly recommend to stand tall, stand proud, fight for, you know, your perspective, for your perception, for you to really influence a lot of your team, your division, your department, whatever it is, and really try to move the needle that way. I think, you know, the more you strategize, the more you meet with folks such as Dan, who, you know, he has, and Kelly, actually, because I've worked both of them, and they've influencing one of my jobs to actually move the needle a little bit more. You get a lot of power from that. You get a lot of influence. You don't become just one voice, you become 2, 3, 4, 5, and that continues to multiply. You have an exponential factor. So moving forward, I think that's how you can make impact. It's going to be slow a little bit sometimes, but you can do it. You can absolutely do it. And we're here to help.
Yes, lots of folks here to help. Marc, anything you want to follow up with on that?
I think like in my world, there's a real lack of data on some of the dimensions, particularly racial injustice as these things play out. So I think we need to be more out there and engaging and not thinking that we have the answers that we can parachute onto a community. It's just a matter of contacting them and telling them about it, but actually going to them. And I think someone earlier on talked about the role of lived experience. And like, so that we're talking about different types of knowledge that can be woven into our understanding of how things are playing out. And that's going to be different in different places. You know, in the Southern United States, the conversation is going to be very different than in British Columbia. You know, here where I am, the really deep, profound climate justice issues have to do with the Indigenous people and First Nations, the ongoing impact of colonization. There were, you know, residential schools where children were literally ripped from their families and tried to assimilate into culture, and that the legacy of those decisions from decades ago is still playing out in real time. And, you know, it relates to fossil fuels as well, because, you know, the colonization was an act of taking land, and that land is now being made into what it has been for 100 years, but the extractive economy is just so dominant and so powerful and so present still in the corridors of power. So I think engage and be curious and make sure you think about who's in the room. And but I think that having that authentic commitment to learning from those and having that inform your own vision of climate justice as it plays out in your particular world, there's a lot of richness to be gained from going through that exercise.
Thank you. I think we're going to hop it to Justin. Justin's going to help us go into some breakouts. You guys are going to bring some questions, and we'll start with Kelly whenever we come back.
I love that. I was going to suggest exactly the same thing. So what we're going to do now is actually just get back into small groups, because Elgin invited us to think about what can we do? Like, what is the actual action for us? And the rest of our time today is going to be action oriented. So I want to give you all a chance in your groups to think about what questions do you have that you feel like this group of resources could could help us think through. These wise people could say, oh, that's where you're stuck. Here's what you might try, right? So we're going to put you in little groups and think about what are the questions that you have, right? What struck you from this, right? What did you notice? You're like, whoa, that was helpful. But then what questions do you have about how to move forward? What questions do you have about how to move forward? And I'm going to ask one person in each group to become the chat master. And you're going to be the person whose job it is to put your question from your group into the chat. Okay. So you're going to have 8 minutes to have this conversation. And again, what struck you? What questions do you feel like if they got answered, you'd be able to take better action? What's getting in your way from acting? And then select one person who's your chat master, and they will put your question in the chat when we get back so the conversation can continue, because we're going to do another 15 minutes or so of conversation when we get back. All right. So with that, Elizabeth, please open up the breakout rooms, and we will see you all in 8 minutes. All right. So I think we have everyone back. I am confident you had amazing conversations. Some of you may have even had panelists join your room. What a blessing that must have been. So what I want to ask is whoever was chat master, please start throwing those questions in the chat. Devin's going to get Kelly and
Marc and Elgin.
Marc and Elgin in here with us. Thank you. And Dan and Alonda, you all got to hear some of the questions. So I assume you can kick us off as questions flood the chat. And again, if you were in a group and you generated questions, please throw those in the chat so that we can see what questions to talk about. All right. And I will vanish into the background again, and we'll do another 15 minutes.
15 minutes. This is exciting. Now I'm scared. We're definitely not going to have enough time because I already know these questions are going to be fantastic. Pop them in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. I think the one I'm going to start with is really good. So I had a lovely conversation with a gentleman in my breakout, and it was about the mindset shift of climate change. So the question, if I can summarize it, was, it wasn't a direct question, but I understand the sentiment. Climate justice is huge, right? It is, how do we get individuals to think about what to focus on, right? If climate justice can be all encompassing, how do we help people understand and help businesses understand where to put their focus? And I started with a little bit of a response just to get you all's brain going around, they're not separate conversations. It's how do we embed justice into the conversations that we are already having? So, but I'm curious to know, what are you all's thoughts? Who would like to go first?
I guess I could just add a little tidbit. I think
I think we said we were going to start with Kelly. I'm so sorry.
Oh, yeah, we did. No,
I did. Kelly's face was like, you said, you're right. Kelly.
I forgot. I was happy to let Elgin start, but I will add my 2 cents. I think the question of like, where do we start? It's so big. It's so overwhelming. What, acknowledging that we're starting in the world of climate justice, it's a part of everything that we're doing, but still, like, where can I go? What should I do? I think the easiest answer is like, focus on like what you're already doing, what you know, like where you have impact and knowledge. So with companies, it's like, well, what do y'all do? And how does that play into the system? And how can you, 10 times out of 10, there's some harm being done because we just can't avoid that, most likely if we're making money. So like, how do you reduce that? And if it's not on an organizational level, if it's more personal, I think it's similar to like, what's my purpose? What should I do? Like it's where do you feel like you have the most capacity to make change and that you'll enjoy doing it and it's not a burden and you're going to be able to like sustain the momentum to do that work, and focus there and start there, and don't be discouraged if it's not necessarily something that you know a ton about. I think for me, like infrastructure development, I came from energy, but I didn't know much about like water and housing and that whole world. As someone mentioned earlier, like the development world is essentially like colonization, but 2.0 of just like taking land and doing stuff with it and making decisions. And there's a lot that I don't know about that world, but that's where I've decided I want to make my impact. And so I think it's about just figuring out what that looks like on a personal level, and then as an organization, like where you're already having an impact and how you can really understand that in a different context and try to do better.
Yeah. Good people with good hearts want to do all the things. And it's okay to, you don't have to do all the things. It's okay to focus on one thing, do that well. And what does doing it well mean? It means doing it with justice at the center. So if you're not doing what you love to do and then what you focus on doing it and you're not doing it well, then start over. Elgin, any additions you'd add?
Really quick, I think another thing to always think about, not only with this question, but others, is think about the misconceptions and disinformation that's out there that can really distract you from the work that you're doing. I think that's huge. We see it when it comes to climate change. I think it's like, it's a high majority of people who, like, I think about 70% think that climate change is real, but they don't think humans caused it, for example. And I think that is one of those clear examples of just misconceptions, distrust of the government, distrust of our officials, and not really understanding things. So really focusing on validating true information that is evidence-based is key in a lot of the work that we do as well. So I just wanted to add that on. Kelly did a great job, though. I don't have too much else to add.
Marc, while I scour, I'm looking for the next good question. They're all great, but Marc.
The first thing you do is save the chat. I keep, like, every 5 minutes, I keep saving the chat because there's like so much good stuff in there and I haven't had time to even process it all. So just constantly regretting that I might not save the chat before leaving this call. So that's number one. But more seriously, I think the kind of question is like, how can we all in our worlds be in service to people and communities? And what kind of process can we undertake that's more deliberative and thoughtful about how we engage those communities? And it could be by starting with community leaders. It could even be something like doing focus groups with various people more at a kind of a grassroots level. And there's another layer that's more about representation. Who's on your board, who's in your organization, how are those, as you talked before, about what are those relationships? So it's the who and it's the how, more fundamentally, I think, in those.
The who and the how. Okay. Very much so. Ooh, lots of really good questions. So there's a couple really specific B-Lab questions, and I'm probably going to lean away from those. I'd be happy to answer, but let's lean into the panelists that we have. We're interested to know some recommendations you have. Now, this is slightly outside of the work that we're doing, but this is so common in the JEDI conversation. I think I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's about hiring. It's about diversifying, whatever that would be, diversifying your board, hiring diverse candidates. It's a slippery slope. We're interested to know some recommendations you have in genuinely hiring more diverse and recruiting more diverse candidates. How do we diversify our spaces? That's what I see. Elgin.
So I have like a lot of thoughts on this, but I'll try and be brief. I think one of the things that you have to identify is the main reason why you're doing this. I thought long and hard about this. I also heard from a few folks that they really don't like JEDI work, or specifically diversity and inclusion, because ultimately it's just about putting Black and brown bodies in white spaces, and it doesn't really incorporate the depth that really needs to be addressed here, which is often, how do you decolonize a traditionally white space? How do you address white supremacy? How do you form an anti-racist group? So really, I think being thoughtful, really understanding, what the purpose is behind you just trying to bring in, a diverse group. Are you actually trying to, do good by it? Are you actually trying to, improve your bottom line in these cases? Like, I think one of the things that we had to remember here is that diversity is also good for your business. It's also really good for your profits. Usually bringing in more diverse people allows you to actually cater to a broader group. It allows you to actually focus on the Black population, allows you to focus on the Latin population. It allows you to focus on pretty much everybody that you really want to reach. in a lot of ways. And you have to also be thoughtful though, and understand that, not only are you reaching these people, but are you actually providing them something of use? And are you doing harm to those people? Is your business inherently harmful? So I think the key takeaway, again, that I just want to focus on, because I know my panelists are gonna cover the rest, or at least cover what they can in this time, is just being really thoughtful, really understanding the purpose behind it. Do you have malintent behind it? Do you have, are you actually understanding these things? And if you don't, reach out to one of these consultants. Kelly and Dan are fantastic. Again, I'm not saying, specifically reach out to them, and I'm not trying to plug them, but I am saying understand that there are consultants out there that do this work. They genuinely understand it, and they will be able to get their message across, and understanding as to why the work that we do here, whether it's Jedi work or something even a little bit further, that work can be done. And there are people out here who are dedicated to doing it, and they're damn good at it. So that's what I just wanted to add.
I'm going to give Marc or Kelly an opportunity to respond. Thank you very much, Elgin. I'm going to ask one more question. So just prepping everyone for what's to come. What I hear, good prep. What I think is important for us to remember is ask yourself, is this for us or is this for them? That'll help you identify what to do next. Is this for my business? Because if it is, am I being extractive? Am I being exploitive? Who is going to benefit from this choice that I'm getting ready to make? And if the benefit is for someone else, then I need to make sure that they are a part of how this setup is going to go, so that I actually understand that we're actually serving in a way that's useful to them, right? Any other additions for Kelly and Marc before we end up with one more question?
Yeah, I just add, I think Elgin's point is really important about the harm that can be caused of bringing people into cultures that are not ready. I think I just saw a statistic the other day that like 30%, I know Marc will say with the source of the data, but they asked people, how stressed they are at work. And I think it was like over 30% of specifically Black people were like extremely or very. This is something I've experienced. I have a lot of, I have a strong network of other Black people, and we all have our war stories from being in the corporate space. And so now being a consultant and trying to advocate to make sure that people's voices are heard and the culture is improving, I would share, assuming that there has work already been done and that is being done to try to set up an inclusive and healthy and non-toxic culture for diverse people, when you are actively trying to bring and recruit people into your organization, I think someone put a question in the chat around like, how do we move away from like the white supremacy culture of like speed and doing everything quickly so that we can really do things the right way and more equitably? In hiring, I think this happens the most and the worst, where people feel like we need to fill the position and we've already gone through this whole process and we didn't find that, so we're just gonna hire this person. I feel like that's the worst thing that you can do. Like, spend the time, do the whole thing again, go back out and find more people, spend 6 months if you have to, because the person, if you hire well that first time and you treat that person well and create a good environment for them, I have never taken one job without asking someone who is a Black person that works there, like, what is it like and how is it? And so it really will pay dividends to create a good culture and bring people in. And if it's a great company and you're doing good work and people feel good about it, that's honestly not the easiest thing to find, and you will be able to attract more. But really take the time and early in that process to not make the quick, easy decision, and to figure out what you need to do for your business and how long it needs to take and what that should look like to find the diverse talent that you're looking for.
Ooh, Kelly is dropping all the gems. That is so true. Secrets. There is a secret. Most people of color will ask other people of color what it is like to work in your organization. If it is not a safe space, they will share. And that might be, again, why your efforts are not being lucrative. Kelly, you mentioned exactly what I wanted, because I want that question to be the last question. We talked about the speed of trust. And that question is, how do we balance the need to move at the speed of trust with the urgency of the climate crisis? And I want to remind us that white supremacist culture has us believing that fast is the best way to act. And it's not always. Anyone, we'll start with Marc. We'll give everyone an opportunity to respond this time, but Marc, we'll start with you.
Thanks. Oh, tough act to follow, Kelly. That was just so wonderful and brilliant. Really, because as you know, I work for a left-wing research institute, and we are struggling with these questions as well. You know, at every level of our operations. I come from a policy background, so I think about how does this like play out in policy. And for me, like what we want are, it's not just a shift to green consumerism so that people can make, you know, greener choices. It's more profound around like structural changes, right? So it's not that we just need to get everyone, you know, out of their internal combustion vehicle and into an electric vehicle. It's recognizing that a lot of poor people take public transit, and a lot of poor people live like near highways and major roads in the areas that are most polluted and affected by car culture. So, you know, the structural changes we need to make are more what planners call complete communities, where people don't need a car, you know, as much, where they can walk or bike or like take good quality public transit to where they need to go to, and like fundamentally, you know, change the game so that even if you're a climate change denier, you're going to inherently lead a more sustainable lifestyle just because of the conditions you're in. And it's going to take a while to get to some of those deeper and structural changes. But like fundamentally, that's where I think we need to go in terms of like really leveling the playing field and creating the kind of inclusive society we want. So the question for businesses is really like, you know, how am I contributing to that structural change, whether it's through changes in your operations, but also in giving voice and using your voice to make change with the powers that be, whether it's like local governments all the way up to you know, Joe Biden.
Thank you, Marc. Kelly, Elgin, speed of trust and urgency of the climate crisis. I'd like to elevate while you're thinking something that Kelly said, right? Sometimes what you think is fast is actually just going to impede, right? Like not doing it the best way possible first means you have to do it again, or you have to try again, or you're going to, you know, start over again. And what I see in Jedi work is that's very common, right? I see a lot of times people say, oh, well, if we have to do that, it's going to take longer. But what's longer than starting over later? Like, is it really shorter, right? So considering that, Kelly.
Yeah, I hope this is related, a little tangential, but I think one of the most powerful things to like push back in general against speedy culture that puts the timeliness of things and timelines above like quality or impact or people's needs is for people to do that in their jobs. And I know that that's hard, but a lot of times it's like, no, I can't do that. Or like, actually, I am taking this time off. It's a cultural thing. And I think in organizations, there's a lot of power in, which I've seen coming in sort of after an organization has really rallied and been like, you know, y'all need to hire someone to come in and help with this. There's a dynamic of like, okay, collectively, we came together and let it be known that we expect this to change. And I think that can also apply to like the speed of work within a culture. And really, I think, showing and demonstrating the power of the employee that gets the thing done once a decision is made, that's really moving the needle. I think BGA, which is where Elgin works, one of his many jobs, is a really interesting example because they have a bargaining unit, which is structured more like a union, sort of to represent them, in my mind, kind of in place of an HR team, but it brings this like union perspective, which is sort of people versus the company in some ways, into corporate atmospheres. And I think when that's not there the same way it is in others, we kind of don't think about the power that we have within an organization to like, you know, let it be known how we would like things to run as well. I think that's always a back and forth, but I just wanted to bring forward that if there's something specific or if it's a general culture, even if it's specific to a, you know, a Jedi or ideas or DEI task force within a culture, to really use the power that you have of the employee that's actually doing the work to set the expectation of the pace that you want it to happen at, and to call in this, you know, white supremacy thing that we're fighting against as you do that, because that's a very hard thing to do. It is.
Mm-hmm. Trust is always more important than speed. Just trust us. Trust us. The trust is more important than speed. Because if you take the time to build the trust, then you're also going to take the time to build relationship. And when you build relationship, you're going to get people. And when you get people, you're going to create power. So taking the time to build the trust is actually going to push the needle on your efforts. Elgin, last thoughts, and we're going to hop off and hand it to Justin.
Yeah, just real quick. I think one of the things that you mentioned was urgency. And I always think of urgency is never a bad thing. If you feel like something is urgent that you need to get done, that's a good thing. It drives you, it gives you motivation. It allows you to really dig deep, and that allows you to really kind of take a diligent approach to it. But as the rest of the panelists have said, and Dr. Williams, is that speed is not always, synonymous with urgency. So really identify that, really take that into consideration moving forward. You need to get things done, but it doesn't always need to be fast, because then you end up missing out on opportunities in which you can engage with stakeholders. As Marc has said on several occasions, really being able to really understand what the goal is. So, and again, having those community members be a part of that is one of my favorite things about advocating for engaging community members. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Amazing. Can we please get some love in the chat, some applause, virtual, actual, analog applause, whatever kinds of applause you can do for this panel. This has been amazing. And obviously we could have spent all day with you. So thank you so much. These are the conversations we need to be having. And I also want to thank both Londa and Dan, speaking about the speed of trust, for actually developing real relationships and having real conversations. That this wasn't just like, hey, can you join this thing for 5 minutes? Bye. Like you really worked for this to be a conversation, and clearly all of you talking, like there's rapport in a way that bespeaks the work of trust. So thank you all for modeling. I think as you were saying, it's when we move too fast ourselves, then we try to be in relationship moving slowly. That doesn't work that well. So it's really important to learn to actually do that at the micro. So thank you all so much. What we're going to do now is take a pause, let everybody just take that all in. And then we're going to come back and orient on action. So Devin's going to put up the slide, give us a little music. We'll take a break for 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 34 past. And someone will throw that in the chat so you can find it. And then we'll get action oriented and really start making commitments. So please don't log off if you want to be with the same people when you come back for the breakout rooms. Take 10 minutes, go stretch, take care of yourself, and we'll get started at 34 past the hour or whatever time zone you're in.